Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen so I can share some slides. So I'm really honored to talk to you today. I started Jump Math, which is a charity, about 20 years ago in my apartment. It was a tutoring club at first, but it eventually grew into an in-class program. And it's one of the reasons I founded the program is because I struggled in math myself. So when I was growing up, I would always compare myself to the faster students, the ones who'd write the competitions. I never really thought I had an innate ability in math, and that was confirmed when I took calculus for the first time at university back in the 70s. I was basically saved by the bell curve. I failed initially, but then the bell curve brought me up to a pass, and I dropped math at that point and didn't go back into math until I was in my 30s. And eventually got a PhD, and towards the end of my program, I was tutoring, and one of my first students was a remedial grade 6 student whose mom had been told that he could never learn math, that he was just too challenged. So a few years ago, we went out to celebrate the fact that he's now a fully tenured professor in mathematics. And you know, I've worked with or observed just thousands of kids over the past 30 years, and based on my own struggles in mathematics and based on my work with so many kids who have struggled, I have fairly unusual views about mathematics, about how important it is and also how accessible it should be to every brain. And that's the subject of the talk today. I'm going to try and make a case that rather than being the hardest subject, a subject that really differentiates people, I'm going to argue that math is actually could be the great unifier. So Jump has grown considerably since it was in my apartment. We now reach about 200,000 kids a year, use it as an in-class program across North America. And we've worked with millions of kids over the past 20 years. And one thing that's unusual about Jump, I hope you can see these slides, we've worked right from the early years with researchers, so educational researchers and cognitive scientists, and this is kind of a short list of some of the people we've worked with. One of the more exciting projects is with the University of Calgary. It's a project called Math Minds, and the researchers led by Dr. Brent Davis have been embedded in classrooms for about 8 years now, filming teachers, observing them, and they're actually even going to release an online course for teachers, a free course based on the findings from that study. And they've really helped us improve our professional development and really trained a number of teachers who've gotten extremely good results in problem solving. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that research. Jump has resources for students and teachers. Many people know Jump as a kind of student resource, but actually the most important part of Jump are the teachers' guides, which are on our website, jumpmath.org. And right now, those are available for free. If you just create an account or register, you can read all our lesson plans from kindergarten to grade 8. And we've also made available some student resources to help close the learning gap with COVID and the sort of summer loss that kids have in learning. So parents, teachers, you can access those on the website. One of the things we're really excited about too, we have a lot of slides that we've been using, teachers use to deliver the lessons. So we're going to start animating those and posting them, kind of like Khan Academy style lessons, to help teachers prepare. Parents could use them, kids could use them. So over the next year or so, we're going to be releasing a lot of digital materials. Jump is listed on the Evidence for S website in the United States based on 2 randomized controlled trials we participated in. And I've written for Scientific American Mind. I've given keynotes at a lot of scientific conferences, including the Aspen Brain Forum. So the things I'm talking about today are ideas that we developed in the trenches working in classrooms, particularly in a lot of inner city schools. But the methods of teaching we developed over many years appear to be very well supported by work in cognitive science, and which is why I've been invited to give talks at these conferences. And I'm going to connect some of the methods we use today with the research on how people learn. The vast majority of people think of math as a hard subject that really differentiates people. And many people were happy to give up math in high school. But there's new research suggesting that math is a far more important topic than people think. So for example, there's been a number of longitudinal studies that have shown that for young kids, math is actually a stronger predictor of academic success than even reading abilities or attention skills and things like that, that math is actually really the gateway for many kids to academic success. There's more and more studies suggesting it's connected to people's financial health, to the kind of jobs people get, to dropout rates. It's connected even to medical health. You know, whether people will take their medicine in an effective way often depends on the level of math they have. And, you know, it's hard to find any area of life where mathematics isn't involved or numbers aren't involved, from economics to the environment. And I think it's becoming more and more critical for people to know math. We've been hit by a number of crises, starting with the financial crisis about 20 years ago, and then there's COVID, there's a looming environmental crisis. And I think we're not well equipped to deal with these crises because we don't have a deep sense of numbers, of risk, of probability. You know, and with the financial crisis, people didn't really understand what would happen when their mortgage rate went up slightly. If you're paying 2% interest at 2% and it goes up 0.5, that doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a 25% increase in your payments. So a lot of people were wiped out when their mortgage rates went up slightly. And I think we're seeing the same thing with COVID. People don't understand exponential growth and how quickly crises can spiral out of control. And so having an enumerate population doesn't really equip us to deal with these crises. You know, there's an even more serious crisis, I think, looming with the environment. If 90% of the engineers on the planet told you that you shouldn't get in that car because its brakes are going to fail, we would take it seriously. We wouldn't get in the car, and we wouldn't put our children in the car. But we're willing to take a risk on the climate or disbelieve climate scientists when they say that there's a very high probability that climate change can spiral out of control if we don't do something about it. We have no real sense of how numbers add up, how these effects add up. Also, when kids learn math, the research suggests they develop all kinds of conceptual abilities that transfer into other subjects. You know, they learn to see patterns and make connections, to create arguments, to see holes in arguments, to understand probability and risk. And also, they develop a sense of curiosity and wonder that really sustains them through life. This is an actual picture from a class. That's how excited the kids can get about math, which most people think of as a very boring subject. But when kids are allowed to succeed without fear of failure and to solve problems and to sort of extend their knowledge, you can get this collective excitement in a class. That's what keeps me working for JUMP. For many years, I worked as a volunteer, but then eventually we built an organization, and I've taught in hundreds of classrooms and seen this level of excitement at every level, from classes where kids are struggling, from inner city schools to gifted elite classrooms. You can see the same collective excitement about mathematics when it's taught well. So even though math is very important, unfortunately across North America, math scores have really declined. In the US, the national tests for grade 4 and 8 have been flat over the past decade or declining for inner city kids. In Ontario, there's been a decline in the provincial test scores in grade 6. And so, you know, in spite of the importance, our growing recognition that math is a critical subject, for some reason we're not succeeding in improving the level of achievement of students. And this is worldwide, even in countries like Singapore or Finland that you hear about in the news, which have great educational systems, better than North America. Still, a large percentage of the population is still struggling in math. In every country, the results seem to reflect this idea that there are people who are born to do math, and then the rest of the population, maybe 50% of the population, really has to just settle with getting by. So, the question is there something we can do about this, or is math just an inherently hard subject for a lot of people? So I want to show you some results from a case study we did. We tested kids coming into grade 5 on a standardized test of achievement, and the red bell curve there shows the distribution of marks. We cut it off at the 9th percentile because that was the lowest mark, and the highest mark was in the 75th percentile, and the average mark was in the 54th percentile. And that would represent about a 3 grade level difference between the top and the bottom kids as early as grade 5. And when we survey teachers, I've never spoken to a group of teachers who hasn't said that by grade 5, we're seeing those kind of differences between kids. And this is in fact a private school where parents are paying money to produce that difference. So I think that shows how deeply we've accepted this idea that there's going to be a wide difference between the top achievers and the kids who struggle when people will pay money to produce that difference. And so that's one of the questions I want to raise today. Is this something that we just have to live with, these differences? So the teacher followed our lesson plans, which I said are available online, very closely. And JUMP is not a workbook program. The student books should only be given at the end of the lesson. It should be a very dynamic lesson driven by questions. The kids are doing the thinking, not the teacher. The teacher is constantly asking questions, and the kids are figuring things out. So the teacher used this method for a year, and when she retested her kids, there was quite a dramatic change. The graph I'm going to show you is a bit unbelievable, but the results were reported in Scientific American Mind and the New York Times. So this is real data. When she retested her kids at the beginning of grade 6, that's what the bell curve looked like. It was a spike at the 98th percentile, and the lowest mark was in the 95th percentile. And then she had her kids for a second year, and at the end of grade 6, they all signed up for the Pythagoras math competition. Which is quite a challenging competition, and all but 3 got awards of distinction. So she took a very average class with a wide range of results, and within a couple of years, they were a very strong class and very engaged in math. I went and taught them a lesson once, and they were just on fire. And they taught me things about division that I'd completely forgotten, these patterns in division. So the entire class was participating. One father told me that his daughter didn't want to leave early one Friday afternoon for vacation because he didn't want to miss the math class. So that's how excited kids can get about math. Now that's just a case study, but we participated in a huge randomized controlled trial, 2-year, funded by the US Department of Education, oddly in Canada, because they felt that JUMP had enough evidence to warrant that kind of investment. And on the right, you can see the difference between the JUMP students in black, the black box, and the control group students in the second year of the study. And this is in problem solving in EQAO style problems in grade 3. The researchers said that was an extraordinarily large effect size, which measures the difference between the two groups. So we've seen from dozens and dozens of pilots, case studies, right up to randomized controlled trials that kids have far more ability to understand math deeply and to solve problems than we're typically seeing. So, and as I said, I once had a student who was remedial grade 6 who's now teaching math. So the question is, why are these kind of results, these dramatic changes possible in math? And there's 2 reasons, I think. One is that evidence from cognitive science suggests that math should be accessible to every brain. At every level, from early childhood education, the predictors of success in math are trivial things that everyone will develop eventually, like counting, recognizing whether a numeral stands for a certain quantity, very trivial things that everyone will develop. These are the predictors of success in math. And recently they did brain scans of mathematicians like myself solving problems, and they got a surprise. They found that mathematicians are using a very primitive part of the brain that has the same sense of number and space that kindergarten kids do. So, and mathematicians have big egos. They don't really want to let that news get out. But I could have told you that, because 100 years ago, logicians proved virtually the same thing, that all math can be reduced to absolutely trivial conceptual skills or concepts. I could teach calculus that way. there's no inherent depth in these little steps or these concepts that you weave together to make math. The depth is in the volume of the concepts, really. But the research is suggesting that math should be accessible to every brain. And then there's a parallel stream of research that suggests that people can develop abilities in almost any area if they use what's called deliberate practice. And that means practicing something relentlessly and pushing yourself slightly outside your comfort zone and practicing until you master or that step or concept, usually with the help of an expert. So people progress much more quickly if they have the guidance of an expert rather than trying to do this randomly. And there's been just stunning studies showing people developing abilities in areas where they had no ability using deliberate practice. So, I want to go a bit more deeply into my first claim that math should be accessible to every brain. At the Calgary Teachers Convention, I once asked about 700 teachers why, when you divide 7 by 2/3, you're allowed to flip the fraction over and multiply. And someone yelled out, because you get the right answer. So, and teachers are my absolute heroes. They've been responsible for the growth of JUMP, but they'll admit sometimes to not having great resources or a great understanding of the math. And this is tragic. It's not teachers' faults. And teachers, when we work with them, want to improve their practice in math, but they need good resources and they need good professional development in math. So when I ask people why this is possible, very few people have a good explanation. If they have any explanation whatsoever, it's usually quite complicated and just pushes the problem somewhere else because you have to explain something else. So normally I do this next section of the talk with a volunteer. I ask someone who's really math phobic to come up and I ask them a few questions. But since we can't really have participation today, I'm just going to ask the questions and hopefully people who are watching this can think this through. So one of the first principles of good teaching is to go back to the right level. So really the right level for this is grade 3 and the meaning of division. So if I say 6 divided by 2, what does that mean? What is that asking you to do with the 6 things? When I ask people this, they usually give 2 answers. One is they say I would make groups of size 2. I'd put the 6 objects into groups of size 2. Or other people say I'd make 2 groups. And both of those answers are correct, even though they're completely different pictures. And that's a sad thing, an unfortunate thing, that division is actually ambiguous. Unless you have a context, you don't know what that means. The 2 could be the number of groups you want, or the number of people you're sharing with, or the 2 could mean the size of the group. And that's where kids really start to struggle in multiplication and division around grade 3, because often the resources they have don't make those 2 meanings clear. They do a lot of word problems, but it never is clear in doing those word problems that there are 2 different meanings. So when you hit so this is one model. I'd call it the size model. You could you could take your 6 things and put them into groups of size 2 in each group. And I find that's the most useful model when you're trying to explain division by a fraction at a higher level when you want to start. And you could show kids with a model, like a chocolate bar. Everyone understands chocolate. So, if you had 6 pieces in the chocolate bar and you divided by 2, you'd be putting it into group pieces of size 2. And then you could go to a more abstract model. You could have a number line coming out of the chocolate bar. So when you say what's 6 divided by a half, a lot of people think that means give me half the chocolate bar. It doesn't mean that. It means in the size model, it means give me pieces of size a half. So I could ask a volunteer or ask you to visualize, if you had 1 piece, how many halves could you cut that into? How many halves could you get out of that? And you went, oh, good, I have a volunteer saying 2. Brilliant. So exactly, you could cut the half into 2, and the 1 into 2 halves. And then I asked students to predict, okay, so how many in the whole chocolate bar? And they say, okay, 12. I can see they skip counting by 2s or multiplying, I'd see there'd be 12. And I hope you can start to see a pattern when I put these numbers up. You've got the 6 and you've got the 2 down below. 6 divided by a half, and then you see a 12. So think of the relationship between the 6 and the 2 and the 12. Then you could ask students, what if you cut every piece into 1/3? you'd have 3 in every piece, and so you'd have 18 altogether. And very quickly, kids see, even math-phobic kids get so excited because they see, wow, I'm just going to multiply those two numbers. You know, the bottom number in the fraction, the denominator, tells you how many pieces you're cutting 1 into. So in this case, you've got 6 pieces, but they're all cut into 3. Is that clear? Because you're cutting it into thirds. And so that's why you'd multiply 6 times 3 and get 18. The kids notice that they just have to multiply the denominator of the fraction by the number of pieces. And then, so they get really excited. We call this method structured inquiry. The kids are discovering things all the time, led by questions. But then you can say, oh, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to put up a question I can't even draw. And so you could put that up on the board. And even in grade 7, kids get very excited about that, about conquering these challenges. And so they notice that even with large numbers, they just multiply the denominator by the number. So I don't have time to explain what would happen if the top number is not 1, like 6 divided by 2/3. If I had 10 minutes, I could show you, but I don't have 10 minutes. But I hope, and if you didn't understand what I just did, I apologize. I always blame myself if someone doesn't get what I did. And if you were my students, I'd give you an assessment right now. And I would not move on unless you all got 100% on this and could demonstrate that you understood why this works. And if you don't get it, it's just because I'm not in the room with you and I can't give you an assessment. But you shouldn't feel bad. It's my fault as a teacher if you didn't understand that. But I don't have time to explain the full concept. But the question is, you know, this is a grade 7, 8 concept. Why does no one know this when it's so trivial? Why do we have a whole population where just a tiny fragment of the population could give you a good explanation of why you flip and multiply? And you can ask that for any area of math. So you might think, okay, I can understand how you could explain an operation, but what about deep problem solving? This is a cartoon from Peanuts that I love. It's true. Kids recognize fake problems pretty quickly. But I'm going to show you a problem that turns up often on math competitions. So I want to show you that this kind of method, which I call structured inquiry, of guiding kids through questions, well-scaffolded, well-designed questions, could work at every level. This is a fairly challenging problem where every letter stands for a number, and you have to figure out what the number is in each case so that the sum actually works, so that the numbers do add up when you replace the letters by numbers. So I was very intimidated by this kind of problem when I was young. I don't know if you're starting to feel a bit of anxiety looking at it. But if you just guess numbers, there's a lot of possibilities. And I think as a problem solver, there are 3 things that really distinguish me as a problem solver. I wasn't a good problem solver, but now I am. And I think there are 3 things that are trainable that you can actually teach kids. So the first is I have strategies. I have about 7 or 8 strategies I use in all my research. One of them is to look for a pattern or a violation of a pattern. So we often ask teachers when we're doing professional development, is there any letter there that stands out for you that looks a little different from the others? If you look at it a long time, and there's no one answer. So some people say it's the H because there's 3 of them on top of each other. And how can you get a number that adds to itself to give itself? If you try every 1-digit number, it doesn't work unless there's some kind of regrouping or carrying happening. But for me, I start in a different place. The letter T looks different to me because it's the only one that has no number above it. If you look under the plus sign, there's a T sitting there with no number above it. That kind of stands out for me. So the second thing that distinguishes me as a problem solver, I have basic knowledge, which the research is showing is critical to problem solving. If kids don't have basic facts or knowledge, they can't become great problem solvers. They can't see the deep structure of things. So I know something about addition that lets me see what T is instantly without thinking. If you take a pair of 1-digit numbers and add them, like 9 plus 9, you're going to have to regroup what used to be called carrying. You're going to have to carry a number into the next place value. What number do you carry when you add 9 plus 9? Thank you, 1. Try 9 plus 9, 99 plus 99. You're still going to carry a 1. The most you can ever carry, no matter how big your 1-digit numbers are, is a 1. So I know T is a 1 without thinking. And that's because I know something about the structure of addition. So then I know, because of my deep knowledge, I know 1 plus 1 is 2. So now I can get the letter E. And then I can't use the same letter, the same number twice for a different letter. So I can't use 1 for O, because otherwise I could throw a 1 in for O and that would give me a 2. So then you just have to think of what pair of numbers are going to give me a 2 if I add them. 6 plus 6 is going to give you 12. So O has to be 6 and so on. So then you're almost done the problem. I got H by guessing. That's another strategy, guess and check. And that doesn't mean guessing at random. You guess to try and understand the structure of the problem. So when I get, and I also you can guess efficiently. I know that H plus H is going to involve regrouping because I carried a 1 over to get the T. So I know that H has to be 5 or more. So I'm not going to guess any other numbers. But I actually got H by guessing. And that's the third thing that distinguishes me as a problem solver. I will never give up. I'll just keep going. I'll guess. I'll try anything. And that's trainable too. When you have a classroom of kids who are succeeding together in math, led by questions, kept in the zone where they can struggle productively, then they learn to persevere in problem solving. So that's the claim I'm making, is that the subject that appears to be impossible, the research, and certainly the research we've done in JUMP, suggests that it should be accessible to every brain. Oh, and this is an example. We added a bunch of advanced problem-solving lessons to our books a few years ago. They're only in our teachers' guides, but if teachers or parents are interested, you can find these online. This is an example of some of the scaffolding leading up to the bigger problems. Like, we start with just a couple letters. In fact, this is in the middle of the progression of scaffolding, so there's even easier problems before this one. But kids solving these mini problems gradually work their way up to the full problem. And I mentioned the research on deliberate practice, which was really initiated by a scientist whose name was Anders Ericsson, where they found that a lot of things we think are, a lot of abilities we think of as innate can actually be trained through deliberate practice. And that what really matters is the amount of efficient practice you have, not whether you're born with ability, but how much practice you get. And we call the method of JUMP structured inquiry. It's a form of deliberate practice in mathematics. And that means starting at the right place with the right review, providing rigorous scaffolding. That means a set of prompts and hints and instructions that help kids climb themselves. Also, in the classrooms that get the best results in JUMP, teachers are constantly assessing. They'll have a discussion with the kids, but then they give a little exercise to make sure everyone understood it. You can't just ask kids, did you get it or not? You have to actually have them demonstrate it. And that doesn't mean marking everyone. If everyone's moving along and really engaged, then there are very few kids you usually have to keep an eye on. The challenges have to be broken into more manageable steps. And the thing that's really unique about JUMP, we differentiate. So there's always extra bonus questions on the board for kids that are small variations on what you're teaching, because kids will finish at different rates. But we don't believe in different outcomes. And the research I showed you earlier, like the case study where the teacher shifted the bell curve so dramatically, the outcomes weren't different for the kids. They were roughly the same. And one of the main reasons people don't try and equalize the classroom is they say, well, you'll hold back the faster kids, or you'll disadvantage the faster kids. But remember those results. In the second year of the case study, the weaker kids were outperforming what the faster kids did previously. So everybody went further together, and some of the weakest kids became the strongest students in the class. And that doesn't mean they're going to all be the same. Kids will still finish at different rates, have different needs. But the belief in JUMP is that they can do roughly the same things. And they may not all become mathematicians, but they should have the right to choose whether they're going to be mathematicians or writers. I mean, people think it's very odd that I'm a writer and a mathematician, as if, if you're using one half of your brain, you have to leave the other half empty for storage. But that's not really the case. The work on deliberate practice has shown we have abilities in every area. So the question is, why, we've spent just billions of dollars in North America on new curricula, very good curricula in some cases, or standards, on technologies, new methods of teaching. And so why math scores, flat or declining. And I think there are two main reasons. One is that this research I've been talking about in cognitive science is only now starting to get into the school system. A lot of the things we've been doing are not well supported by evidence, and I'm going to talk about those. And I think there's an inefficiency in the design of a lot of math resources. So just to set the stage for that, there's a great book called Why Don't Students Like School by a cognitive scientist, Daniel Willingham, who's one of my heroes. It's one of the best books on education I've read on how to apply principles of cognitive science in your classroom. And he said, we're very curious, but we're not naturally good thinkers. Most of the things we do that we depend on for our survival are encoded in our brains, so we do them automatically. If we had to think, we'd die. And if you look at the Roman civilization, over 7 centuries, they never developed the concept of zero as a placeholder. But they were doing taxes, they were building bridges, they had this workaround, very complicated workarounds, because they never had the idea of zero. They couldn't do long multiplication, long division, things like that. So an entire civilization of brilliant people didn't discover the concept of zero, which shows we're not naturally very good thinkers, unless the conditions are right. Also, the research is showing that we easily get overwhelmed. We suffer from cognitive overload. So there's a lot of studies have shown, this is a meta-analysis here by Alfieri, that suggests that if kids don't get a lot of guidance, they don't do as well as in classrooms where the teacher's constantly providing worked examples, feedback, elicited explanations, which means helping kids, scaffolding the explanations so kids can make them. It also shows the importance of practice. Herb Simon, who won the Nobel Prize in economics and became a cognitive scientist, said that one of the worst ideas in education is this idea that practice is drill and kill. The research shows overwhelmingly that kids only develop abilities through practice, and they love practice, but you have to make the practice engaging. You don't want to make it, the options aren't no practice or drill and kill. The option you want to choose is practice that's engaging. And this method of structured inquiry I've been talking about is extraordinarily engaging for kids, and they'll practice endlessly if they're always given a challenge that's just within their grasp, and they keep extending themselves. So I'm not talking about rote learning. Rote learning is terrible. When I explained division by a fraction, the questions were aimed at making you understand, not making you memorize. And the fact that it was broken into manageable chunks is not anti-conceptual. It's the only way people develop concepts. And that's what these huge meta-analyses are showing now, that unassisted discovery is not working, but guided discovery, or what we call structured inquiry, can work. So you need a balance. You don't want to go back to drill and kill, but you don't want to have unassisted work where the kids are constantly struggling. You need a balance between those two. And I think there's a really deep reason also when I talk about these inefficiencies of why we're not seeing kids flourish in problem solving. So I think this is a claim is true, that most educators think that kids will benefit from working on rigorous, complex, rich problems that are relevant, real world problems. And I don't disagree with that. Everybody wants to create 21st century learners, kids who can persevere in problem solving, who are creative. But there's a kind of paradox. The more we focus on that, I'm going to claim today, the more kids are at risk of not becoming great problem solvers. In fact, I think we've produced a generation, which you can see from the anti-scientific movements in North America, that actually never wants to see a problem again as long as they live. Like, all our investment in problem solving over the past 2 decades has produced a very, very kind of arrogant and anti-scientific generation who has no real respect for mathematics or science. So how come, well, there's a paradox, how we focus so much on problem solving, why is this happening? And I think the reason is deep and subtle, and I believe not many people are looking at the real reason. So if you look at in a problem, what dimensions can you change in a problem? You can make it more rigorous. That would mean, deeper concepts. You could ask kids to communicate their answers more deeply, or you could increase the complexity of the problem. And when we're giving professional development now, I often ask teachers, I say, well, let's get out of the math wars. Let's go to chess, where there's a lot of research on how kids learn. And maybe we can see things clearly in chess that we can't see in math. So we asked teachers, would you rather, if you had to teach chess to all your students, would you rather have a program where from the beginning of the year, everybody plays chess with some coaching, but kids spend a lot of time playing chess together. Eventually strong players emerge. Maybe some of the weaker players pick up things from them. That's one model of education, is where the kids do a lot of working together with some guidance, but whatever they are expected to learn at the end of the year, which is to play the game of chess, they start right from the beginning of the year. Or would you rather have a system where you start with mini games with just a few pieces? Like, I don't know if you can see the slide, but in the vertical chess boards, there's a king, I think, and two kings and a rook. And you could ask, could you checkmate in 2 moves or something like that? And these little mini games have been designed by experts, as in deliberate practice, to draw kids' attention to the deep structure of the game. Like, this is a strong position, weak position. This is how a certain piece moves. Here's a pattern that's really powerful. And gradually you add more and more pieces and more complexity. And these exercises are designed to develop what are called mental representations. That means a really deep idea of the structure of the game. And eventually the kids start playing the full game, and by the end of the year, they're playing the full game. And when we ask teachers, they say overwhelmingly, I would rather have the second system, where you introduce rigor and depth more gradually and incrementally. You start with very easy problems, a lot of review and scaffolding, and you move to the full game. It's a good thing teachers choose that, because the evidence in cognitive science says that's the best choice. You need to scaffold challenges into more manageable chunks. You need to draw kids' attention to the structure of the game and so on. But here's the paradox. If you look at, we've reviewed most of the math programs in North America and around the world. And if you look at any math program, by the end of chapter 1 or 2, kids have to answer problems. Even if they've only learned a couple concepts, they still have to tackle multi-step, complex, real-world problems with full communication by the end of unit 1 and 2. In fact, you can't even give kids a good grade in term 1 if they aren't doing those kind of problems. So it's a bit of a paradox. I'll just leave you with that. The research in cognitive science says overwhelmingly that that's not going to work for the majority of people, but that's how we design every classroom and every resource. So that's something I think we need to think about. Should our programs look the same at the beginning of the year and the end of the year? And you know, a lot of people think JUMP is a rote program because we designed our program very differently. At the beginning of the year, we start with review. The lessons are much easier in book 1 than in book 2. And the hardest stuff isn't even the student resources. We keep it for the teacher's guide only. The teachers can assign the questions when kids are ready. And it's caused us a lot of problems having this structure, because people don't understand why the program would look different at the beginning of the year and the end of the year. Now, I just want to end by talking a bit about the psychology. So I'm very concerned about math achievement, but there's also a big impact on kids when you make math accessible to them, particularly if they've struggled. So there's research on school connectedness that suggests that kids who feel connected to their teacher, to their school, engage in much healthier behaviors. They're less at risk. They do better academically. And the Center for Disease Control and Prevention suggests you can see there's about 4 strategies here for increasing connectedness. If you look at the first and the fourth in particular, giving them the academic, emotional, and social skills they need to be engaged at school, and creating trusting, caring relationships with teachers. When you have a hierarchical classroom where the vast majority of kids are struggling, then it's very hard to develop that trust. And it's very damaging to teachers too. So the Vancouver School Board did a large survey of teachers using JUMP, and if you'll notice the 5th bullet point there, the teachers said it really did, this collective engagement of all the kids working on roughly the same things did foster a sense of connectedness and belonging to the larger group. It also helped kids become better problem solvers and so on. And we saw this in London in a large study with about 500 kids every year. These were behavioral students and special ed students. And these graphs show the percentage of kids who were considered to be at grade level at the beginning of the year in each cohort, around 12 to 28%. So on average, about 20% of the kids. And every year, about 60% of them pass national exams. And these were kids who normally would have fallen further behind every year. They were very challenged students. And the teachers said things like that the kids were much more confident, eager to speak out and participate. One of my favorite quotes, one of the teachers said that the behavioral kids are now reprimanding the other kids because they want to get on with their lesson. And I saw this. I did a demo class where on the third lesson when we came in, the kids cheered. They were so excited. And these were kids who were thought to be unteachable. They were so excited about succeeding in math. And that's another kind of paradox. You know, we think of, there's a huge focus on differentiated instruction now, treating everyone differently. And obviously you have to differentiate your instruction. But I think, especially at the beginning of the year when you're catching kids up, but I think we differentiate too much. And my hero Willingham said that one principle of education should be that kids are more alike than different in how they think and learn. Our brains all work roughly the same way. I need the same scaffolding everybody else does, even though I'm a mathematician. I know a lot more, but when I learn something new, I have to go through the same process anybody else does. But I also think we're more alike in motivation. So if you look at the science of the behavioral sciences, three of the main motivators for people are a sense of purpose, sense of mastery, and a sense of autonomy. So when all kids are succeeding in mastering and solving problems, they start to feel a sense of purpose collectively because everyone's succeeding together and enjoying it. Durkheim, the sociologist, called it collective effervescence. We never feel anything more intensely than when we feel something as a group. That's what, as a playwright, I saw that when I volunteered in inner city classrooms. I thought I can get these kids really excited, but I can't if there's a hierarchy. If kids are comparing themselves or afraid to participate, I can't get this collective effort going, effervescence going. And then when kids are feeling the sense of purpose, they also have a sense of autonomy. They feel they're choosing the work. So I've seen kids beg to stay for recess to do math. I even broke up a fight once by telling the bully that if he didn't apologize, I wouldn't give him his bonus questions. And he apologized. So these things all feed off each other, but can only happen in a classroom where you reduce the hierarchies. You know, there's research as early as grade 1, kids can tell if a teacher has different expectations, even if it's a great teacher. Very early, kids start to compare themselves and decide who's in the inferior group, who's in the superior group. And once they decide they're in the inferior group, their brains stop working. They stop remembering, engaging, and so on. And it becomes a vicious cycle. So that's one of the reasons it's so important to close the gap between kids early in the year. Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, it's a wonderful book. She found that kids who think they need to be born with a gift for something do worse than kids who believe they can get better through hard work. On average, kids who have a growth mindset, who think they can get better by their own efforts, do better on average than kids who think they just have to be born with a gift. And I was a kid who had a fixed mindset. I thought I had to be born with a gift when I was young, which is why I gave up all the time, or was afraid to push myself too far because I might meet my limitations. She watched a jump class once and said that because the kids are all working on roughly the same thing, it's exciting, they're moving at an exciting pace, that would help them develop growth mindsets. And this is a picture of an actual class in New York. It's in a very poor neighborhood in Manhattan. That's how excited, that's the collective effervescence I was talking about. That's how excited kids can get together. And these kids got the greatest gains on the New York State test score of all schools in Manhattan. Actually, in all of New York, out of about 1 million kids, they got the greatest gains on the state test score. For a number of years in a row, the grade 4 teachers of that school were just spectacular. But that's how excited the kids can get. There's a great quote from Solzhenitsyn. That says, it's a universal law of education. Intolerance is the first sign of an inadequate education. An ill-educated person behaves with an arrogant impatience, whereas a truly profound education breeds humility. That's a great quote for our times. And I think in this kind of crazy scientific age of ours, I think we need to be much more humble in the face of numbers and math, in the face of risk. We need to adopt a much more humble attitude that's open to science and understands, how dangerous nature can be if we don't understand it. And if we don't rely on the knowledge we've built collectively over centuries and the wisdom we've built collectively over centuries. So it really comes down to different visions, I think, of teaching. If you have programs that are inefficiently designed that aren't based on the science of learning, you get inequities and then you get isolation. Kids are isolated. But if you have efficient design, then you can produce equality very quickly in mathematics for the vast majority of kids, and you get this collective effervescence and engagement. And that leads me to the final point. We know there are huge economic losses that and risks that come from having an enumerate population, but I think there's an even deeper loss. Kids are born with this incredible sense of wonder and curiosity that drives them. I read this study that said when kids are learning to walk, they will walk multiple football fields in one day and fall many times. But kids gradually start to lose the sense of wonder and their drive to learn through failure. And that's really the greatest loss, I think, of having these hierarchical systems that aren't based on evidence. And I hope, I'm optimistic because the science of learning is starting to penetrate the school system, and I'm optimistic that over the next decade we'll see a real revolution in education. So thank you.
Question 1. What do you think of the new Ford imposed math curriculum?
I mean, the curriculum itself, I think, is good. JUMP was actually asked, to comment on aspects of the curriculum. So no curriculum is perfect, the new standards, but there are some good changes. I think that it can't be rolled out very quickly, though. It's going to take time to roll out. I think teachers need to be prepared for it. Resources have to be created. We're now changing our JUMP resources. We're making changes to our resources to meet the new curriculum. For me, the deeper problem is not the standards or the curriculum. It's really the resources that are developed to deliver the curriculum. Are they evidence-based? Are they based on the science of learning? For instance, does your program look exactly the same at the beginning of the year and the end of the year? If it does, if it has the same level of depth and rigor, then there's probably, it's a red flag. It suggests maybe this is going to just keep creating the same results. If you don't close the gap early in the year and build confidence, you're going to have students who are giving up, who stop engaging, their brains stop working, and you get the same old hierarchies. So it's really the parents, teachers, administrators have to demand that whatever resources they're being given are tested. JUMP has gone through 2 randomized controlled trials. That's unique in Canada. Resources need to be tested before they're rolled out. And teachers need to be given permission to try different things and share their learning with each other. So that's really the key thing.
Thank you. Next question. Does deliberate practice work for older, i.e. senior minds?
Yeah, it works at every level. I've got a senior mind, and it's the way I learn everything new in math. Definitely my memory isn't as good as it used to be, but I find I'm much more creative in math now. I'm actually a better problem solver now because of all the knowledge I have and experience. And also, I've just learned to synthesize things more, to be creative. I've learned more strategies and things like that. So it makes up for my poor memory. So I don't think there's any point at which you have to stop learning and at which point where deliberate practice doesn't work.
Next question. The focus of cognitive science is primarily the individual. To what extent, however, does the JUMP method also rely on the social dimensions of learning, i.e., the way children learn in cooperation with one another?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Very deep, difficult question again. So in the JUMP lessons, there's lots of scope for cooperative learning. There's games, there's activities, and teachers can use our resources flexibly. However, I'm going to make a radical claim, and people can test this. In a classroom where a lot of kids are struggle or behind grade level, I believe you get a much better results is if you teach the whole class together, they're all being assessed on roughly the same things. You're constantly giving them bonus questions to challenge them more, but you drive everyone together. And the way you differentiate is you have some extra questions up for the faster kids. And Mary Jane, that teacher who shifted the bell curve, was an expert at that. She'd always just have a few extra questions up, but everyone was doing roughly the same thing. There were some kids who were years behind, but they didn't know it. They all every day. The great thing about math is I can walk into a grade 6 class, even if they're 3 grade levels apart, I can design a lesson so by the end the gap is closed in whatever I'm doing. So rather than having kids work individually at all different levels, which is the normal model, like you give a rich problem, they all find their level. Move everyone together, assessed individually, but with this group energy because they're all discovering things together. And as they develop, a better conceptual foundation, as they develop more confidence, then let them struggle more and let them work more in groups. So again, I think your program should look different at the beginning of the year and the end. The kids can work productively in groups and actually not bully each other and participate equally, the more equally prepared they are. So I would claim that teachers will get better results out of group work if they first close the gaps and move everyone together with individual assessment. But that's something people can test. I might be wrong. The more and more kids develop their capacities, the more you can do productive group work. That's what I would say.
Next question. Does the JUMP method of teaching math work with current math teaching? Can a parent use it to help their child no matter how math is being taught in schools?
Another complicated question. So I didn't, I have a daughter who's good at math and she's in science now, but I didn't teach her that much because it's hard to teach your own kid. When I survey teachers and say, have you ever tried to help your own kid? They say, yeah. And I say, what's the number one thing your child will say? And the teachers always say, that's not how my teacher taught it. So it's a big problem when you try and help your own kid. So the answer is yes and no. A lot of people are using JUMP resources at home and to help their kids. Our tutors are using them. But sometimes you have to do a little work to align it with what they're doing because the child always feels I need to be doing what I'm doing that day. It's a tricky balance. And that's with COVID, we posted a lot of free resources on the homepage that the parents can use. There's student practice sheets you can print out and with instructions, with the lesson plans. So I wouldn't discourage that for sure, but you have to have a lot of patience if you're teaching your own kid. You've got to be patient. And you also, you have to assume if your child isn't getting it, it's your fault, not their fault. Because there might be prior knowledge that you're assuming they have. You might be teaching something in a way that's different from what they saw at school. You might not have a great explanation. You have to be really patient and constantly trying to improve in teaching your own kid.
Next question. Is it ever too late for anyone to learn math?
No. I mean, I didn't go into math until I was in my 30s. I've taught 60-year-olds, people are just astonished when they see how easy math is at whatever age. In fact, one day when we have more capacity, we'd love to do studies with elders to show that the best way to avoid cognitive decline is to use math. But we don't have the resources to do that yet.
Next question. How much is this system used in Ontario? Changes with virtual learning now and around the world. Are classrooms better?
Well, so the The good news is JUMP is being more and more accepted across Canada. We've had whole school district adoptions. This happened in the past 4 or 5 years. The randomized controlled trial we participated in was in an Ontario school board. And we had, until COVID hit, we had major pilots set up in a lot of the largest districts in Ontario. So we're hoping those will continue next year. So there's a growing acceptance of JUMP. And as far as the virtual resources go, the research is mixed on the impact of virtual resources. A lot of stuff that's being sold as kind of the next thing has no evidence behind it. But there is some evidence saying that virtual resources can help with homework, for instance. And I think the virtual resources will keep improving. The sad thing for me is that a great teacher like Mary Jane can get jaw-dropping results right now if they just use structured inquiry. You don't, and a lot of virtual learning is necessary because of these gaps. You're trying to fill in the gaps with kids. So like we're designing a virtual program and we see the ideal use as the teacher still drives the lesson. Everyone moves together because there's this group excitement and you don't want kids on the screen all the time either. So we're trying to create great teachers and the virtual resources can help with that. The virtual resources help for kids who need extra help, who miss classes, who might want to do some enrichment, things like that. But in the core things that everybody needs to know, our vision is that the teacher moves everyone together and the resources supplement that. That I think would be the ideal system. But again, I'm not a futurist, so virtual resources may do things that I can't even predict.
Next question. In COVID times, how do we build effervescence with online learning or homeschooling?
That is another great question. We're just starting to, we'll let you know in a year because we're just starting to experiment with that. But I think you can form small groups and have kids participate and so on. You can have kids answer things online. What we're doing is we created all these lesson slides that teachers project on smart boards or PowerPoint during the lesson. It's got all the diagrams, all the questions, and the kids love them. They can come up and manipulate the images. So we're experimenting with taking those slides and animating them so they can be used remotely. And within a year or so, and we're going to keep iterating and trying different versions, but in a year or so, we're going to try and figure out how to get the same energy in the classroom using those slides.
Next question. As you are a nonprofit charity, can funds be directed to a specific community?
For sure, yeah. We actually have a national book fund. Just to give you an example, TD Bank has supported a national book fund that's reached tens of thousands of students, where if teachers apply, they can get our whole program, including professional development, for free. And we prioritize either Indigenous or inner city schools. So definitely you can, if you're interested in donating to JUMP, you can contact us. You can donate directly on the website, or you can contact us and direct your. We have some funders who've been funding our Indigenous work. They're private individuals. We're now in about 20% of students on reserve use JUMP now, and we've been translated into Inuktitut. JUMP is being used across northern Quebec. And we're now giving permission for groups to translate our materials into any language, any Indigenous language. So if people have an interest in those things, let us know.
Next question. As a retired elementary teacher who tried to use inquiry and a lot of manipulatives, I'm concerned about the back to basics philosophy that seems to be evolving these days. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion in the debates. You don't want to go back to a school system of rote learning where no one understood everything. The only positive thing about those days was that kids got more practice, and the expectation was that most people would get it. But apart from that, you don't want to go back to rote drills. But pure discovery without much guidance also is problematic. And so I think that we need a system where kids are constantly challenged to think, but they're guided by the teacher. We call it structured inquiry. The kids should still be doing the thinking, so it's still inquiry, but it should be very structured.
Next question. Is this a similar problem to the phonics and whole language debate that took place a number of years ago?
It's very similar. for a long time, people didn't think phonics were that important, that, you know, that you had to teach kids to decode and so on. And now people realize it's as important as the whole language part. And so I think in math, we're finally moving to that. There's been a big shift in math where people are realizing um, you need to move to a structured inquiry model.
Next question. What are the strategies with teaching math to kids with autism? Are children with autism good at math?
So if you'd like a much more complete answer, my book, The End of Ignorance, is half of it is about my work with an autistic boy who was one of the most challenged kids I'd ever seen. And it's about my struggles to understand how his brain worked and how I could help him. And he eventually made huge advances in math. He started to like math, but it was a real challenge. And for him, I think one of the challenges was he was hyper perceptive. You know, he could look at a train and say, that's a hybrid of these trains. He just loved trains, buses, and things like that. And so I think he had trouble, you know, seeing the number 2 in different contexts look completely different. He couldn't generalize quite often because he was so hyper perceptive. A lot of my work was just having him understand math more abstractly. And I was an amateur, so but I had big success with them. But many autistic kids are different. They have different capacities, and you really have to figure out for each kid. But I have taught a lot of special ed classes with autistic kids in them, and they certainly flourish in these equitable classrooms. They absolutely flourish when they don't have to be afraid of being isolated or different, when they can put their hand up and participate. It's much better for them than a hierarchical classroom. Thank you.